Hello everyone. Update time for the track car build, but also mostly just a focus on the S62 that's going in the track car. So this video will actually do double duty for anyone that's interested in working on the S62, particularly the cam timing is usually heavily discussed part of this engine because it can be pretty tricky to get right. This particular engine actually has a different set of heads on it because the previous owner of the engine tried to do the cam timing, or they replaced the guides, and they were unable to get the timing correct and bent valves on, I think, both of the heads. Some valves on both heads, I believe. So they bought a used set and installed them, but they never quite finished putting the engine back together, and that's how I received it after it's sitting for several years. So apart from wanting to ensure the timing was done correctly to my standards, the engine was actually pretty dirty anyways, from sitting for so long, and unfortunately it was sitting with the valve covers off or maybe just loosely sitting on there, and so all of the cams were rusty. But I knew this going in, and the price for the engine reflected the condition, and most importantly it came with all new guides and a few other bits and pieces that were new and relatively expensive. Plus the rod bearings were also done, with the help of someone that I know that knew the previous owner. They helped them do the rod bearings, and so I'm confident that job was done correct. So I didn't touch the rod bearings, although the lower oil pan is off. There's a lot of dirt and debris in there, so I'm really happy I decided to take that off, since it's not necessary to take off to do the timing work. Anyways, I had a set of cams, laying around in the basement warehouse, that were super nice, which is why I kept them. Not that there's really any, normally there's usually not a use for used stock cams. You can't really do anything with them. But I'm super happy I hung on to them, because here they are now being used in this engine. So moving on, I got everything cleaned up. A lot of stuff actually put back on. I took the guides off, cleaned everything up. Dirt and debris had fallen in there, and just old RTV and things I wasn't really happy with. But I also pulled everything out of the valley, including the throttle bodies. Those were off and cleaned, all the carbon taken out of the bores and the injectors. Cleaned out those bores so that they'll sit real nice. So everything's been off and cleaned and reassembled to that point. I also, the keen eye will have already noticed that the heat exchanger that's normally resides here in this valley is no longer there, and instead there are two block off plates. That is to delete that heat exchanger, which is beneficial for track work, really any kind of high heat type driving. Pretty much necessitates an external oil cooler though, because otherwise running at high temperatures or high load situations will let the oil temperature spike too much. Run cooler probably around town, street driving. And really, if you're only street driving, I would not recommend deleting that. Really works well as a stock setup. But if you're supercharged and or doing track work or a lot of heavy, high load, high temperature type environments, then the oil cooler delete and external cooler is highly recommended upgrade. But everything's cleaned up, ready to go. The guide's back on. I have pretty much everything else sitting over here. Spent hours cleaning everything and not even going full OCD, just getting all the grease and dirt cleaned out. O-rings changed, front main seals changed, The valve covers are all cleaned up on the inside, well, and out. Also to note, spent some time cleaning both of these Vanos units. Solenoids, standard practice for me, take the old filter rings off, activate all of them to clean them out, hear how they're clicking, and obviously replace the O-rings, or D-rings is technically what they are. But I also, if they haven't been done, I always kind of clean up the solder joints on the back and add additional solder to bridge them. Whether they're clicking well or not, I just do it as standard practice. So I did that on these, resoldered all of them, activated them all, flushed a lot of brake clean through. They all click nice and strong. So hopefully I won't have any issues with that. New chain tensioner, you can see sitting there. And just all the standard stuff. So it's all ready to go. And as far as cam timing goes, which is somewhat of the meat and potatoes here, since I changed the cams, all of this stuff has been off, and I have already reassembled to this point and got it to where my cams are now relocked in with the pins, which I highly recommend if you can get a cam timing tool set to do it, but you don't need it. I believe it's 8mm drill bits, or even a bolt, 8mm bolts. As long as you get the proper size in the hole, that's really all that matters. And same with the crank pin. Once we get all that back together for locking the crank. But for now, we got the cams locked. They're in position. These bolts are new. You definitely want to replace these if you ever go in this far, and make sure you torque them correctly. They're just M6 bolts. Do not over torque them or you will probably snap one off. It's not a huge deal because there's a good amount of space here. If it snaps at the head of the bolt, you should be able to just spin it right out. Or really in any case, it's not really a tight area. You should be able to fix the problem, but you can also avoid it by just using a torque wrench with the right setting. All right, so these are all torqued on, ready to go. Cams are locked, and this is pretty close to the phase that a lot of people will be at if they're simply just doing the guide job. Unless you're replacing these tensioners in here, which the tensioners themselves are fine on this engine, and there's really not a lot of wear on the guide part, so there was no reason for me to change them. That's somewhat of a personal opinion. Some guys just want it to all be new, but I'll tell you, these are getting super expensive from BMW, and maybe if I was doing that on this engine again, I would replace them because those have 340,000 miles on them. But I didn't when I did the cam guides, the chain guides on that engine. And it still runs fine, and there's no issue because they really didn't have wear. So this engine, I think, was around 150K miles. It's an 03, if I remember correctly as well. 03 engine, so it had all the updates done to it already. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and install the hubs to the cams, and we'll pick this back up after those are on. All right, so now we have the exhaust hubs are installed. Just follow TIS really for all this part. I would replace the spring plates if you can. Definitely if you have a older build, 2000s for sure, and some 2001s I believe will not have the updated spring plates. They're a little better design. I think they changed basically the thickness of the spring washer to be a little thicker, and the flat washer is a little thinner, but overall the total thickness is greater. I could have that backwards or incorrect, so take that with a grain of salt. But they changed the design, reduces the Vanos rattle a little bit. In any case, 150K miles, I definitely would replace them. Still up to you on what you do on your engine and how many miles it had on it. But mine are all new, all 4 of them. So we got the exhaust hubs on, pretty straightforward. I do follow the TIS where, lightly tighten them all down and then back them off so that you can still turn the adjuster here loosely, just as if you were, checking cam timing with only the valve covers off and you loosen those 6 bolts. You need to be able to turn that, but you want pressure to be even. So that's done, and now you can see also the main chain is on. Just set up here, no bolts installed. Again, follow TIS, very important. So the chain is on, and then we use zip ties to just hold some tension on the tensioning rail, since there's no cover and piston tensioner in there right now. But we want to hold tension so that the timing gears, the chain does not skip on the gears at all, because the next step is to get at least in this case, if you're doing a full tear down and replacement, get the lower oil or timing cover on and all secured, the way you normally would. And then that allows us to get our, damper back on and the crank locking fixture, I'll call it, so that we can know where the crank position is and relock it back at TDC. That's the next step here, but we do not want any bolts in here yet, and you can see the holes aren't even lined up, which is normal, but we need to get to the point where we can turn the crank and know exactly where it is and lock it exactly at TDC to go along with our cams locked in their positions as well. Okay, so now you can see lower timing covers on. I went ahead and installed the water pump as well, and the damper is just temporarily bolted on using the old torque to yield bolts, and then obviously I just popped on the big nut for turning the crank, and we have the crank locked in position. And I then had to go ahead and actually take the sprocket off and move it to get it closer to be aligned. The way I do that is, pop it off, hold tension. The rail already has tension because we zip tied it on to help hold the chain, but you still want to be pulling up on it. But I kind of pull up on the chain with one hand, and then with the other hand, I lower the sprocket and take tension off of a tooth here. And it's kind of hard to describe, but basically lower the sprocket one tooth, which will then kind of put a chink in your chain, and then just work that chink around to the other side to flush it back out. Probably what's going to happen, so don't get frustrated if you can't get this popped right back on, is the chain's going to jump over the edge of the rail here when you take the sprocket off this hub face here. So make sure when you're about ready to slap it back on that you get the chain back over the edge of the guide. Once that's on, you can pop it back up and then see how close you are. No, I wasn't lucky enough to have that just line up perfectly. And I don't know that that's ever the case. People that have done this more times than I have can probably say whether or not they've seen it. But that's why we have this Allen key here and the exhaust hub. And the reason for that, and if you follow TIS, you'll see that they say for fine adjustment, you can turn this and get it to basically move the cam. There we go. So see how now the holes are not lined up? It's because I pulled on this. And obviously you gotta remember you got your adjustment here. And just sort of bring this back in line. Boop, there we go. And now I can proceed to the next step which I believe is to get this intake hub and oil pump sprocket on for the Vanos. And then I'm gonna rinse and repeat on this side as well before going any further. I'll get, like I said, this one's lined up, so I wanna get that hub installed, and then I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. That's clearly not lined up at all either. Okay, looks a little different again. The Vanos units are on their way in position. Probably could have recorded this if I wanted to spend the time and set up a stand, because this can be a little bit of the tricky part. But if you follow TIS and M5 board DIYs for this, it really isn't that bad. You know, just take your time. I guess a couple of key tips: use a hex key for moving this Vanos adjuster. You just gotta be really careful, and you can kind of see the spline gear in there. And I guess let's go to this side, because they're still sticking out a little bit. You can see the helical gears. I'm sorry, not spline, helical. That's better. Intake side, I always get the intake side started first. This one's a little tougher to move. There is a special tool. I think it fits into that little oil galley, but I just use that same Allen key and apply a little bit of pressure right here. And you just gotta watch what you're doing. I actually used my big gut and, you know, push on this lightly as I'm pushing counterclockwise lightly on that, just to get that hub to turn a little bit, just enough so that you'll feel that pressure release and the gears will engage. You're not going to be moving it like that. It's going to be just that tiny bit, just, you know, a little bit to get that next tooth to engage. Because if you decide to just, you know, spin it and go this far and you've now skipped one or two teeth, that's how you bend valves. That's all it takes. So you really need to make sure to get the very first gear spline to engage. You know, and then you move down to this one, which is much easier because you have this little slot here, but same deal. You have a little more control, and just real gently apply a little pressure this way, counterclockwise, and a little pressure in on the Vanos unit, and that'll get the splines to engage. And then you just partly install it here, just until the O-rings are touching. You can see I just have, you know, one on each side, kind of finger tight to that point. And then again, following TIS, you're going to tighten down all 6 bolts, or all 12 if you're doing both sides. Tighten them down to the torque spec, and then back them off a quarter turn. And then now you can go ahead and tighten down all the Vanos bolts, and your unit is now installed. And from here, I mean, that's kind of the tricky part. And from here, it's really just a matter of, you know, following TIS. Once this one's done, I'm gonna, you know, pop the TDC pin out there and rotate slightly counterclockwise to take the slack out. Again, I'm just following TIS here, and then, you know, tighten stuff down, bring it back to TDC, and final tighten, spin it around, tighten the other 12 bolts, and then bring it back to TDC and check the timing and see where we're at. And just like that, we have a running engine. Finished the Vanos work and assembling the rest of the engine, got it in the car. Obviously this took a lot of time, but I didn't make a follow-up video finishing off our Vanos work and timing work. but it was successful. The engine runs. It runs pretty strong, and I actually did the Vanos test with the DIS or GT1 tester or software. Wanted to just run it and see. I took a video of the test running on one of the banks for those of you who may not have ever seen that test being run. So I'm gonna clip that in at the end of this one. But everything passes, and like I said, it runs strong and quiet. Super pleased with that. Still trying to diagnose a little bit of a drivability issue. You can see a fuel pressure gauge connected up there, but that's maybe a topic for another time. But for now, this is the conclusion of the Vanos and cam timing video here. Like I said, I'm gonna put that clip of the Vanos test running to kind of end things here. But thanks for watching.